Tell you about some of the events that we're doing, some of the programs that we're doing for the CFO audience. Today, the focus, of course, is how the CFO can be the Chief Innovation Officer. And we have to speak before you, Mr. Bhavani Singh Shekhawat, and he'll be talking about the do's and don'ts of building an innovation DNA for your company. I'll just give a little bit, sitting to my left, to my immediate left. I'll just tell you a little bit about him. He has been a 25-year experience across Fortune 500 companies. And in these 25 years, he's worked for Coca-Cola, for Nielsen, for Reckitt Benckiser, and returned to India about 3 years ago, and he's been teaching at various B schools in India and overseas. And of course, I think innovation is probably, he's trying to get it, make sure that he can tell companies a little bit about it. Bhavani, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Right. Well, pleased to be here. I'll just hook up. I've got a set of slides just to sort of walk us through the discussion. So if you don't mind, I'll just quickly go and set it up, and then we'll have a conversation. Okay? Relay something to you, and we can exchange some stories, because I'm sure you've had your own journeys with innovation. You have your own assumptions, your own thoughts, your own challenges around innovation. So if you could have a discussion with you pitching in whenever you want to, I think it'll be a lot more fun, right? So my name is, as Ashutosh said, Bhavani Singh Shekhawat. I live in Bangalore. I've been living here for a little over 2.5 years. When we decided to come back to India after 2 decades or so, this really seemed like a place to have the softest of landings, despite some of the challenges we have in the city. And we can exchange lots of stories about those challenges as we go along. But I spend my time now evangelizing innovation. I love this space of innovation. This is really where I want to be. And so I do a little bit of teaching, I do facilitative workshops, and I really enjoy making innovation happen. So we had an interesting session in Goa a couple of months ago in September, where I spoke to your peers and your colleagues, and we just exchanged some stories, and here I am again. And I can see at least one person who was there before, so you've heard it all, right? But let me start by saying, or by asking you a question. Have you heard of this gentleman called Michael Puett? Do you read newspapers? हम सब पढ़ते हैं ना, अखबार तो पढ़ते हैं. And this was the biggest story 3 days ago. See this is clear? Is it focused? Because I find it a bit hazy. And people who rated his class to be the most life-changing are finance undergrads. He's a behavioral scientist? Okay, one more, otherwise we're going to run. I've been given half an hour, and I'm notorious for just, dragging on. He is a professor of divinity. He is an expert in Chinese religion. And the course that he teaches is Chinese divinity or international religion. And he's not even a professor at Harvard Business School. He is a professor at the Harvard School of Divinity, which does multicultural, multi-religious exploration around myths, our past, and our collective future. And I find it fascinating. He is not teaching people the relevance of P by E ratios and book values and EPS. What do you think he might be when he gets into a classroom at Harvard full of very bright, enterprising, enthusiastic, hungry for success, wanting their names on Wall Street Journal, those kind of people, wanting a job in consulting, first thing, wanting to be entrepreneurs, and what are they learning about yin and yang and Shaolin and Kung Fu and Karate? He doesn't know for him finance is an F word. But He goes there and people listen to him. What does it tell you about Harvard? What does it tell you about the students at Harvard? And what does it tell you about the methodology of learning at Harvard?
Quite different from traditional.
Very unconventional, right? Did any of you could even remotely think that Michael Puett was a professor of divinity? Even remotely, दिमाग में भी नहीं आया होगा, right? It is so obtuse to Harvard and what we know Harvard to be that it will not be even in the frame of reference. You would have thought of Hogwarts, correct, right? But that's, that prompts a question. And to me, that is really the critical thing. And it's probably one of my favorite learnings, and I'd like to share it with this group as well. And that is, what is it that becomes innovation? Do you think here, the students who are attending the class and the professor who's teaching the class, what is their purpose? Are they doing innovation? Or are they being innovative? And to me, that is where the rub is, like good old Shakespeare would say. That innovation is an outcome. Innovation is not even an objective. The purpose is to be innovative. And if we become innovative, almost everything we touch turns out to be innovation. It's not rocket science. So the challenge really is to be innovative, not to practice innovation. And of course you can practice innovation, but imagine practicing innovation without being innovative. Would you ever try to practice medicine without being a doctor? Or being interested in the human body? You wouldn't do that, right? But very often, when I engage with businesses around the world, they believe that innovation is something that we do. And I think that's a fundamental disconnect, which is the reason why we have this, I shared it with your colleagues, and I wouldn't waste your time because we have little time here, is that Ernst & Young and BASES, which is one of the largest organizations in the world which tests success of new launches, they actually did a research worldwide and found 98% of all intended innovation failing, not even meeting one hurdle of the 4. 98%. Now, did they set out to fail? Did they say, "Chalo yaar, aaj fail hoke aate hain. Chalo aaj plan banate hain." Did they do anything like that? By the way, I have Hindi spasms, so if you're okay with that, I'll continue like this or I'll stop. I'm just taking revenge. All these years I couldn't speak Hindi. मैं दबा के बदला ले रहा हूँ, right? So if you have an issue with it or if it becomes a problem, please feel free to let me know. So what really, and that is the difference. That 2% is this difference, where the leadership did not delegate innovation. It was interesting. 2 weeks ago, and I wouldn't name the company because it's one of your peers, let's say it's one of the big 4. And I was running a workshop for them. And guess what? They say, "Yeah, we need innovation. Bhavani, yaar, we need innovation. हमको बहुत ज़रूरी है. Loose motions लगे हुए हैं. Innovation करना है. ठीक है. So come and do something. Something, right? What something? So they said, no, we'll create something. And you know what? I have a leadership, learning and development team. That will do innovation. That will take care of the execution of it. So I go along. I talk to the learning and development or capability building head, who unfortunately has enough on his plate already. We have churn issues. We have the guys in the US shouting at us. We have our parent group giving us a lot of trouble, and now we want to do innovation. Kuch hone wala nahi hai. ठीक है. But what happens, we start on this journey. And so we set up a date, and I have to go to Bombay to address a group of people. And very blatantly, I receive an email saying, Bhavani, everything is in place, all is done. I have now delegated. My team will take over from here. So I said, what will your team take over from here? Innovation. My team will take over from here. I said, fine. And we walk into, and I walk into that conference room with leaders sitting, and guess, the title of the workshop that they have designed is Tactics of Innovation. You see what happens down the line? If the leadership of the organization only believes in innovation as something to be done by the rest of the organization, you will be in that 98%. Because being innovative also means being open with the idea of me doing something different, not me directing differently. There's a fundamental difference. There's a fundamental difference of me directing differently. A few years ago when I actually had a real job, like all of you, we were sent to these wonderful universities and campuses to sit and listen to various people talking about various things. And one of those sessions I distinctly remember at Duke, where a senior leader came up and said, we were going through this throes of change in every single continent, and at the end of the session, he made a very telling statement. He said, you know what the problem with this room is? That all of you say, yeah, we love change. We love change. We have to change. Don't change my job. We will lead change. But I'm fine the way I am. And that's where the fundamental issue is. Because to me, being innovative starts with that fundamental question. And that fundamental question is, how do we see the world around us? What do you see here? Right? Inverse map? Yeah? What else do you see here? It's a map? Yeah? It's a map. What's the purpose of a map?
Locating the places.
Yeah? Where a place is, and if this was in front of you, what would you do? Or let's say, what would most people do? You'll turn it around, right? You'll turn it around. That's what you'd do. That's what most people would do. Keep a mirror, yeah? What else could you do? Color it, yeah? That's interesting.
Go from the other side and start.
Correct, that's one thing you could do, but most people wouldn't do that. There's nothing wrong with this map. It's just that, for once, you're standing on the North Pole. If you were at the North Pole, this is what the world would seem like. But what happens with most of us? We try to change the world to suit us, because we are so fixed in our positions. We are so fixed in our positions. हमारे सामने लाके वो मैप रख दिया, उसको उल्टा करो यार, तभी मुझे समझ आएगा. But what would a child do? A child probably would walk around saying, यहाँ से तो ऐसा दिखता है, oh fine, I'd never seen it like this. And I'll not, I can't give you the full story, just for the lack of time. Maybe we'll talk about it over some beverages after this. But this one change transformed the success of Sydney Olympics. After Tokyo, the first time the Olympics traveled further east were in Sydney. And the Australians said, yaar, hum to barbad kar denge. We have never done it. We have no experience. We have to look westwards. Because who knows how to do the Olympics? The Europeans and the Americans, they've been doing it. So we have to borrow expertise from them. We have to do something. And anyway, we are down under. We are the arsehole of the world. People were using those kind of statements. Australia is down under because everyone is used to see the world in a certain way. One school teacher just couldn't take it anymore. And he tore the map of the world, pasted it upside down, and had a discussion in the class. That day, those kids went home and started a discussion at home, and that changed, that created a movement of looking at Olympics differently. And we all know, not only did Australia did wonderfully in those Olympics, but what happened after that, they were able to sustain that success rate. And again, I'm not saying this one thing changed it, but I'm saying a change in perspective is the very fundamental beginning of being innovative. Are we prepared to have that change in perspective? The problem with all of us is we aspire for a certain perspective, and that perspective is connected to a position. Once we acquire that position, we believe that that position demands a certain perspective. And that's where damage happens big time. So one fundamental rule, at least that I strongly believe in and I'm going to give you, is if you want to be innovative, can you encourage your people to talk to the person and not the position? Fundamental rule. If you can encourage that within your organization, you will unleash innovation. As long as in your organization, people are talking to positions, they're talking to marketing directors, finance directors, CFOs, CEOs, CXOs, senior managers, innovation will languish. One of my colleagues used to say this, and it's unfortunate but it's true, कि इंडिया में ना तुम लोगों का बिजनेस कार्ड बदल दो बस, जॉब डेफिनेशन मत बदलो, टाइटल बदल दो, they'll be happy. आज मैं सीनियर मैनेजर बन गया, आज मैं सीनियर डायरेक्टर बन गया. Don't change the job definition. Don't even give them more money. They'll be fine with it. Somehow we've got obsessed with it, and I know I'm making some sweeping generalizations, but the idea is to provoke. The idea is to not talk statistics. I'm not saying 78.263 people do this and 22.14 people do this. I don't even know what that means, but I'm saying that at least that's been one of my learnings. That if you want to unleash innovation in your organization, and if you want to set onto this journey of being innovative, could you encourage being comfortable with a different perspective? Being comfortable with a different perspective, and could you encourage, at least in islands if necessary, people talking to people, not positions talking to positions, not roles talking to roles. Because if you study innovation, if you study all orbit shifts, all game-changing innovation, you will find that to be the fundamental differentiator. Why do startups succeed when others have failed? There are no positions in startups. Everyone is in the same journey. The ones who succeed, and when I mentor startups, I say this, that if you're doing this because you don't like a job, get out now. But if you're doing this because you really believe in this, and you really believe that this is who you are, then there is a good chance that you'll be successful. Right? So, just moving on. The second thing is, there is this obsession with leadership. There's an obsession with leadership. Everyone wants to be a leader. I was going through all the, I wouldn't say tamasha, but all the celebration around Sachin Ramesh Tendulkar and his Bharat Ratna, right? And everyone is raving about it. Everyone is saying, oh, what a great service to the nation. And it's no mean achievement. And if you look at various authors, people have come up with statistics to prove everything. And I always believe that statistics is like Bhagwan, God. Jo mango milega. Whatever you ask, Shriman Microsoft Excel will deliver. But the real question is that we are a country which is obsessed with heroes. We are obsessed with, we need heroes. Our cultural DNA demands that we have to have heroes. We worship heroes. Our mythology worships heroes. And when we consider someone to be a hero, all else is pardoned. Right? And likewise, we are obsessed with leaders. We are obsessed with leadership. I'm not saying leadership is not good, but I'm saying for an innovator, there is a slight challenge here. Because leaders need followers. Can you be a leader without having followers? By definition, it doesn't work, right? And the fundamental rule around innovation is that an innovator is actually a challenger. If you look at breakthrough innovation, whether you look at Titan, whether you look at Tanishq, whether you look at Arvind Eye Hospitals, whether you look at Kudumshri, whether you look at public service innovation, there is so much innovation that is happening in India. Our business schools don't teach them. We still learn Virgin Atlantic and Apple, and I'm saying they're great innovators. But there is such tremendous innovation happening in our Bharat Desh. Every single one of them has been led not by a leader, but by someone who challenged the system, who challenged the systemic organization and came up with an amazing, incredible breakthrough. So, the quality of a challenger is perhaps best illustrated by this. Anyone who's done whitewater rafting? Yeah? And we all know about what's on the right? The Kerala boat race. What is the fundamental difference? Right? 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 And what does the environment look like between the two?
So that's fun, and you are doing it for fun. And here it's a competition, so it's obviously tense.
No, whitewater rafting can also be competition.
This is stable water, that is
Right? The external conditions in a Kerala boat race are controlled. Right? So what wins in a Kerala boat race? Process and perfect execution. There is one person, and we call that person the henster, right? He's at the helm, he's helming, he's giving the command, and everyone is simply executing. And the ones who execute best, who practice to execute best, win. Everyone has a defined role. Number 3 has a role, number 4 has a role, number 6 has a role, right? Everyone in that boat has a role. What happens in whitewater rafting? One is the water is unpredictable. The water is what we call the VUCA world. You've heard the VUCA phrase, right? Harish Manwani made it famous. Do you know the VUCA phrase? That we live, when he gave his famous address at the AGM, the last AGM, Unilever. Harish Manwani is, as you know, the deputy chairman of Unilever, and he's the president of the region. And he's, in my earlier life, he was one of my seniors. You know, he was. The boat turns and topples around, and suddenly the guy who was right at the back is now right in the front, right? And he has to warn the others of the impending dangers. He has to switch roles, and the guy who's at the back has to do something else that he was doing, and he doesn't know when the boat will topple again. And we talk about flexible organizations, we talk about fleet-footed organizations, we talk about organizations that can navigate the VUCA world, and yet we want to win the Kerala boat race. How is it ever possible? Innovators love being in a whitewater raft. I'm not saying you don't need execution. Don't misunderstand me. You need execution. And people will tell you that that's where innovation fails or succeeds. But if the organization wants to be innovative, which is the purpose of the leadership in this room, even though you might be functional leaders, right? You are leaders. How do you encourage people to enjoy whitewater rafting? How do you create conditions of whitewater rafting? Will be your challenge. And that is the beginning of that journey where you become innovative. Right? And like I said, India is the challenger. Often enough you'll be asked this question, and I'm asked this question, that why isn't a Facebook coming out of India? Why isn't a Google coming out of India? Why is India the factory of Google? Why is India the factory of Microsoft? Why is India not innovating? And I challenge that all the time. I think India is innovating. It may not have done a Google, it may not have done a Facebook, but I don't think they are the only innovations worth celebrating or even worth aspiring for. I believe that innovation in India is at a tipping point because if you look around, all these organizations, they have not only created new benchmarks, they have created on the day of launch. How is Scotland Yard, given our heritage of industry and enterprise, we have come up with fewer innovations. That is a fact, right? But the other fact is GE's Mac 400 is now innovation for the world, right? But why is it that an Indian company, and I was speaking to people from Analog ADI who created the chip for the GE Mac 400. The amazing thing was the leadership at Analog did not know that GE Mac 400 was an innovation for the world. They needed someone like me to come and tell them that. They are creating the chip, GE is buying it left, right and center. They don't know that this is game-changing innovation. They treat GE Mac 400 as a successful new product. GE does not treat it. If you talk to people at GE, one of my earlier bosses was Dave Calhoun, who was the vice chairman of GE, and he says, we never talk of great products. We talk of how many lives are we changing. Product is only a segue into that. Right? It's a different way of thinking. Similarly, people like J.K. Tripathi or Govindappa Venkateswamy or Varaprasad Reddy, people who have, or Lakshman Singh, who's changed the life of farmers in Rajasthan. So there is lesser rainfall and there is more productivity. One person changes it. Tata Chemicals, one engineer, junior engineer, goes and changes the way in which land is treated for fills. And Malara, the greening of Malara story that you might have heard. One junior engineer. They're all challengers. They want to solve for something. They ask questions that have not been asked. And they've all become, Srini, they're all now, Arvind Eye Hospital is now a global standard. Community policing is a global standard. Scotland Yard is implementing it. They're all becoming global standards. But the reason why they're becoming global standards coming out of India is because the people who wanted to do this did not want to do this for recognition or their own Bharat Ratnas. That is a fundamental difference. And I'm not saying there is anything wrong with it. I think that's fantastic. When what you're solving for is bigger than what you want to be recognized for, there is a good chance that you will change the world.
And the person who did that is not realizing that he is innovating.
Because he's not saying, today I will do innovation.
Yeah.
He's saying this question was never asked before, but it's a question worth asking. And I will stake whatever needs to be staked for this question. And I don't care if I win a Padma Vibhushan or a Padma Shri. Do you think someone like Bhimsen Joshi started out by saying, oh, if I practice for 24 years, I'll win the Bharat Ratna? Or Manade, who performed for 74 years. Can you imagine? Performed for 74 years. Recently passed away. And I had my life-changing moment was spending time with him. And he said, Gana hai, death is an inevitability. But for me, I'll never retire. And that is the difference. And that's why what he did his legacy will remain forever and ever and ever and ever. Right? So that's a fundamental difference. And I think all of us, if we could begin to start believing that innovation for India should be what quality meant for Japan, we will be really, really leveraging this tipping point. Because the ability is there. What's lacking is the purpose. And people in this room are the ones who are charged with instilling that purpose. And if there's one comment I'd like, if there's one thing that I'd like you to take home, is that. What are you solving for? And what's the purpose behind every day when you get up, go to work, go to sleep? And if that purpose is not game-changing, you're not setting on the journey to be innovative. Right? And there are lots of other things we could talk about. There are myths and gravities, and we'll talk about them. But perhaps now is the time to pause for some questions and ask you if you had any thoughts.
From a prospective point of view, from an application point of view, it's excellent. But the main challenge is you're lost in the day-to-day battle,
Yeah.
So what you're doing and how you're doing, but you're not really so bothered about the larger picture also. Now, the grind has become so much.
Right, but who's created that grind? We have created that grind. Time expands to fill up, or work expands to fill up available time.
Perkins is law.
Right? So we have done it. We are the people in this room, we are responsible. In my, one of my previous roles as a CEO, that was one of the biggest realities for me. That have I created, and sometimes it happens by accident, but have I really created the space and the escape velocity to create history? Otherwise, सुबह होती है, शाम होती है, बस जिंदगी हुई तमाम होती है. In fact, there are some sad situations that emerge as a result of that. कि यार, I will do this job for 3 years and then I'll move on. But I want to do innovation. In the 3 years that I'm in this job, no, it won't happen. If that mindset is there, it won't happen. And the most amazing thing is, and I'll just give you one story which I hadn't planned to share, but I'd share it nonetheless. And I know we're running out of time. Is very recently, just about a month ago, I lost a very dear friend, someone I grew up with, chaddi baddi jisko kehte hain. And he was a very successful man. He was a top shot at Fidelity, lived in Boston, so he had worked very hard to get there. And one day he had a stomachache, and he went to the doctor, and this is at Harvard, the best medical facilities. They examine him, say, okay, prostrate, come up, we'll clean you up and you'll be fine. He goes there, they open him up, and they find lymph node cancer in the last stage. And despite all the therapies and all the transfusions, one day, on the 14th of August, he's told, Sharad, you've got 20 days to live. Imagine. फिल्मों में होता है तो अजीब सा लगता है, right? He was told, you've got 20 days to live. Now get off your meds. He was very weak, very frail, but he had an amazing tenacity. So he knew, and he survived probably 16, and very peacefully he passed away. But conversations during those 14, 15 days were the most bizarre, fascinating, life-changing, enriching conversations. He said, you know what, we keep deferring these questions. वो सवाल तो आएगा. Whether it's at the age of 40 or 55 or 60 or in these 15 days, that what is it that we are solving for? We can only, and to me the realization that you can only defer those questions. You can never really circumvent those questions. At some stage in our lives, the amazing thing is, you can solve them when you have the ability to solve them. What if those questions appear when we do not have the ability to do anything about those questions? What is it? What is the legacy? What are we taking with us? And I think, and it sounds philosophical, I know, but I think That is really a fundamental question. If we ask that question, when we have the ability to ask that question, and when we have the ability and the wherewithal to do something about it, as opposed to when that question reveals, and then we don't have the ability to do anything about it. And then I asked him, Sharad, I don't want you to take any regrets. I don't want you to feel bad about anything. He said, look, there's nothing I can do. Feeling bad, feeling good, emotions, they don't mean anything to me. But I just wish. And he read out. And all of those things are easily doable. For example, I wish I had built a better relationship with my parents. I thought my success meant a lot more to them. But now I realize, I knew it, that something was missing. I kept saying, I haven't called my mom, I'll call her tomorrow. He says, now the maximum I can call her is probably 3 hours. And I can't even speak on the phone. I've been asked to keep away from radiation. So I'll just leave that thought with you, right? And there is a lot of things we can talk about. I think there are books and realms written around innovation. But I wanted to share with you what I personally believe in, because at the heart of it, even, and the answers to a lot of this, you must have seen some TED videos, particularly one of Simon Sinek, where he has used physiology and human biology to understand why we do things the way we do, and he's connected it with why the Wright brothers came up with invented the airplane, and why Langley didn't, why Apple could succeed where Dell didn't, and so on and so forth. Because they ask these fundamental questions. The why gives rise to how and what, not the what to why, right? So I'll just leave you with that thought. And to create history, the first thing is to generate that escape velocity, burn the bridges that keep us tied to subah hoti hai, sham hoti hai, zindagi tamam hoti hai. Ask some of those fundamental questions, because we all are meant to be extraordinary, each and every one of us. And I'm not saying this because I philosophically believe in it. It's proven by recent research that came out of Cambridge that the human DNA has an imprint of all known DNAs on the planet. And if that is the case, then we have the capability of the universe. But each one of us has a unique DNA, which means we have a unique purpose, or perhaps a collective purpose in which we can make a unique contribution. How do you discover that? You cannot discover that by seeking answers. You seek answers and you ask some fundamental questions. And that is being innovative. And innovation then happens. Then whatever you do will be innovation.
Here is that, first of all, how do we define innovation? Now, innovations like, say, Facebook, like, say, Microsoft, like Apple, it happens once in a lifetime, happen one in a century. If we get up in the morning and think of that I will be the next Facebook, it's impossible to reach any destination. It's only what will result is frustration. To me, innovation is something which will enhance productivity and which will help make people's life easy. If we probably break it up into very easy and approachable goals like that, probably it can be as mundane and simple, like, say, I tell my department boys that today you tell me 3 ways how you're doing things differently or how you have saved time. Maybe it can be an Excel worksheet also. It can be a combination of something and you save time, or you have automated in your ERP. To me, this is also innovation.
Could be.
And it is the combination of all this. It's a sum total which basically can be totally different, and it can life change.
And that could be innovation. Innovation is not just iPods and Apples, but to me, innovation is that inspired ingenuity that betters our being. Whatever metric you choose, whether productivity, time saving, cost saving, it is that inspired ingenuity. It may be an epiphany in the shower, but it's that inspired ingenuity which betters our collective being. Because I think the purpose of every business is to create memories that you would like to take with you forever. Create those moments in the lives of whoever you serve, whether it's consumers, whether it's businesses, whether it's organizations, whether it's societies, whoever we serve, if we can better their being through our inspired ingenuity, that's innovation. Thank you for that.
Any more questions? I think we can do it, as you said, over some beverages. Probably the answers will be more interesting to hear then. Thank you, thanks indeed. I now request Mr. V.C. Gopalaratnam, he's CIO, AP, Asia Pacific, Japan and China region at Cisco, to discuss some of the technology trends that CFOs must keep in mind. It's interesting to hear from someone who's...
I can go there.
you fine going there?
Yeah. I think my voice is loud enough.
Perspective, and also some of the questions that as finance professionals you can ask when dealing with the CIO, so that for want of any other better examples, if the two departments can speak the same language, if we can even begin with that.
We hope.
My responsibilities, I'm the CIO for Cisco in this part of the world. And the term CIO has changed over the years, right? Traditional definition of CIO is Chief Information Officer. That has morphed into Chief Innovation Officer in some places. And now it also is called the Chief Intelligence Officer, right? Where the expectation from the business is that the CIO will actually provide necessary intelligence to the organization so that they can take more informed decisions. And how do you leverage technology in order to make that thing happen, right? I actually changed the term. I actually call myself a CFO, right? And can anyone guess what the F is in CFO? No? No. It's flexibility, right? And really the CIO has to become the Chief Flexibility Officer for the organization. For the simple reason that if you think about what is happening, right? The expectation is that the CIO will actually balance these paradigms and really make it work for any organization. The first one is really a balance between productivity and innovation. I think you just mentioned that innovation is really a creative way of doing your job. Considering the macroeconomic environment that we live in today, the budget for any technology organization is flat at best. It's actually going down, right? And I'm sure that's the same in all of your organizations as well. And therefore, the expectation is that we will continue to do more with less. And therefore, we've got to prioritize. We cannot go out and do every project that we want. We've got to do things that are relevant to our organization and really the ones that deliver the highest impact. However, in any time there is a downturn in the marketplace, those companies that don't innovate or invest in R&D or invest in product development almost always lose market share when the market picks up. And that is why you will continue to see, whether it's high-tech companies, etc., they continue to invest. They really don't starve their product development or R&D budget even in a downturn. Now, as the CIO or as the technology practitioner, we've got to balance the two. We cannot constantly go to the CFO community and basically say we're going to continue to invest in all of these programs because it's going to give us new capabilities. The response back would be, yeah, that's great, but what are we going to get from it? What's the ROI? What's the payback period? Because we just can't continue to make those investments. So that's the world that CIO lives in today, is the balance between how do we deliver productivity versus innovation. And one simple methodology that we try to use, and it's again very aspirational, we'd like to cut our budget into 3 pieces. One piece is called running the business, which is basically to keep the lights on so that nothing breaks, right? So we'd like to devote 1/3 of our budget to running the business, and that's where productivity comes in. The second part of it is really to what we call change the business. And when you change the business, it means giving the business new capabilities to be more competitive in the marketplace. And almost generally speaking, the money that you save in running the business is actually funneled towards investing in changing the business and changing capabilities that you have as an organization. And the other 1/3 is really to grow the business. which is really how do you contribute as a technology organization to the top line of your organization? How do you impact revenue? And while profitability is not necessarily top line, how do you also drive enhanced profitability? So that's how we kind of balance our budgets as well. The second one is really around the paradigm between globalization and governance. We really have to get closer to our customers wherever they are. And therefore, we cannot stop globalization. We cannot stop global business models. However, we've got to balance it with the risk of doing business in new parts of the world. And that's why you've got to pay attention to regulatory changes, you've got to pay attention to taxation, to pricing, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, any technology solution that we deliver has to work in a global context, but it also has to be legitimate and legal in whichever part of the world that we do business in. So we've got to distribute our investments that way as well. And the third one, which is probably the most important thing in the world that we live in today, is the balance between workforce and technology. India is probably one of the youngest countries in the world today. For example, at Cisco India, 60% of our population is Gen Y, which is people born after 1982. So they're about 30 years old. And this generation is used to working in a completely different way than at least my generation. They obviously use smartphones, they use tablets, et cetera, et cetera. To them, SMS technology and WhatsApp and all of that are decision-making systems, which for our generation was voicemail and email. My kids don't even read email anymore, right? Because they do instant messaging, they do blogging, wikis, and so on. And that is the workforce of tomorrow, and they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And so when they come into the organization, they expect the office environment to be cool, right? Because that's how they've grown up. And the smartphone is the most important device to Gen Y worldwide. Access to the internet is a fundamental human right as defined by the United Nations today. I'm not kidding, it's official. It's water, it's, food, similar to that, connectivity is a fundamental human right. And that's what they expect when they come to the workforce, because they don't know of any other way. However, as technology professionals, we've invested hundreds and thousands of dollars in our legacy systems, which we can't just rip and throw out because of the fact that they haven't hit end of life, or we are still continuing to reap some benefits. But that generation is very, very restless. And so you've got to make sure that you're investing in the future so that you can attract these people. And we did a survey of about 3,000 students and first-time working professionals. And we really asked them, would you work for a company that pays you much less but gives you greater flexibility when it comes to using your own device or giving you access to the internet so that you can go to any site that you want at the office? 90% of them said, yes, we will take a pay cut, but we rather have flexibility and the freedom to actually do these things in the workplace. Therefore, our traditional awareness that we had these ERP systems and CRM systems, blah, 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 right? They're all going away. And therefore, as finance professionals, when your CIO is going to come to you and ask for investments, in order to facilitate that, what's your response going to be? Because if you don't invest in that, you're not going to attract the talent that is going to sustain your organizations in the future. With that comes the challenge of governance. With that comes the challenge of information security. Because while that generation is cool and they can do all these things, they really haven't been through finishing school. And they haven't worked in a corporation, right? And therefore, they don't know what it is to actually work in a large corporation and follow protocols and follow ethical procedures. And you can't do this. They've never heard of that in their life, right? So you've got to kind of strike that balance and make the investment on the right-hand side to attract the right people, but all the investments in the middle to make sure that you're protecting your enterprise as well. So that's another paradigm that you have to focus on. So if you look at what's going to happen in the next 10 years, really the only constant is change. It used to take about 5 years for any technology to be conceived, to get implemented, and to become part of day-to-day operations. Today, that 5-year period is 12 months. And if you don't catch that wave of technology in 12 months, the opportunity is gone. And you're already on the back foot at a disadvantage. So it's that quickly the technology changes are happening, and that's why we have to be on top of that. First one is mobility and video. We talked about the fact that the smartphone is the most important device. People in 20 years ago wanted to get connected. Today, that whole thing is to stay connected. The highest usage of social media in the workplace is between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. globally. That's in the middle of the day when all of us expect to be as productive as possible. And these people are on Twitter and Facebook. To them, that is being productive because they're collaborating with colleagues, they're making decisions, etc., and they want to be able to do that using BYOD, which is bring your own device. And now that's morphed into BYOT, bring your own technology. They want to bring their own operating system to the office. If I'm used to Windows, I want to have Windows in the workplace. If I'm used to Apple's operating system, I want that in the office. Because I'm very familiar with my device, don't give me something that's not going to make me productive. That's the way they work, right? And video. Everything is about video today. Nobody leaves voicemails anymore, at least that generation doesn't. They embed video in WhatsApp. They have video on their smartphones. They have video on the laptop. They use Skype. They use, the Cisco technologies, for example. But that's really what is going to happen now. Video is now going to be defined as the voice for the next decade. What voice technologies was between 2000 and 2010, video will be for the next 10 years. The next thing is really cloud. Everyone uses the term cloud. It's another way of calling it a managed service. You're buying a service from somebody, and that service can be anywhere in the world. All you're looking for as a consumer is that that service needs to be efficient, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be cheap, it needs to be competitive, and it needs to give you what you're expecting. You really don't care who actually provides that service to you. So someday, and I'm as an IT professional, IT may not be in the business of managing voicemail and email and doing all of that, because people in the organization may buy that service from somewhere, or they can get it free, like Gmail, for example, from Google without paying anything. So we have to be really prepared as leaders of organizations that this change will necessitate buying services from outside the company, and that is something you may not be prepared for. We now live in an application economy. Applications run the world. There are almost 5,000 applications that come out on a daily basis around the world that go into iTunes and app stores and around the world. And therefore, applications will be king. And therefore, we need to be ready for that. Are you going to put these applications within your company? Or is it going to be outside the company that people are bringing in and out? And that is something that you will have to fund eventually, right? So get used to it. The Internet of Things is a new paradigm. IBM calls it a smarter planet. Cisco calls it an Internet of Things. Whether it's data or mobile devices or people or things, everything is going to get connected to the Internet in the next 10 years. Every one of those will have an IP address. Each one of us as human beings will have IP addresses because something will get embedded under our skin, which we've seen in sci-fi movies. We will have an IP address. The pills that you take will have IP addresses. So doctors will know what is actually happening to the pills once they go inside. That's happening today. There are cows in Europe which have IP addresses so that the farmers and whoever owns them know what's going on within them. There are trees which have IP addresses which provide information to the world on how much carbon dioxide is being generated, how much oxygen is getting depleted, etc. All that is happening today. So that's going to happen in the corporate world as well. And then, of course, big data and analytics. At the end of the day, data generates information. Information becomes intelligence, and intelligence becomes wisdom. And your technology teams will provide you tons and tons and tons of information from all the systems, both within the company and outside the company. And therefore, you will have to invest in data mining and analytics platforms so that your businesses that you support can make more informed decisions with the data that's been given to them. Pricing data, sales data, customer data, finance data, supply chain data, HR data, marketing data. And that's all information from within the company. And there's market research, external data, all of that coming from outside. How are you going to manage that? So this is probably where you will be making most of your technology investments in the next 10 years. And the question that you will have to ask yourself is, where's the ROI in all of this? And that's the conversation that you need to have with your CIO. In some cases, the benefits are hard dollars or hard rupees. In some cases, the benefits are goodwill because you're attracting a new set of employees. In some cases, it's soft benefits like productivity, which you may or may not be able to measure, right? So that's something you'll have to think about, and this is really what the business implications of all of that are. What companies are doing today to balance investments is there are two things that people do. One is standardization, the other one is customization. How much of your technology platform will you standardize? And how much of it will you customize? If you're looking at deploying globally, you will have to customize. But if you keep customizing for every need, you'll never be efficient. So you've got to strike the balance between the two. The new business models is really cloud and software as a service and pay by the drink, where employees in your organization would want to pay for a particular service only when they consume that service. However, as CFOs and CIOs, you have made the investments for the whole enterprise. What if nobody uses those services? Then it becomes a sunk cost, right? That's really not delivering any value to you. So how do you balance that? User experience is king today. If people don't like something, they won't use it. They won't adopt it. They will switch to something. And today, the replacement cost for a consumer costs nothing because it is clearly, if you look at a supply and demand thing, really it favors the consumer. And therefore, organizations really have to compete to deliver something cheaper. Obviously, getting close to customers, and we talked about information security. I'll stop right here because I think the next slide is probably going to be a reiteration of the same thing. But the point is, times are changing so fast right now. And when the CIO and the IT organization or whoever makes technology decisions comes to you, these are the things that you've got to keep in the back of your mind. There are some things that are inevitable that you cannot fight, because if you do, you're going to be left behind. There are some things that you will have to go out on a limb and make the investment and hope that the ROI is there and that the adoption is going to be there. And then there are some things which are just good business sense, and you just have to do it because it continues to sustain your business, gives you new capabilities, gets you closer to customers, and keeps you competitive, right? So that's broadly the world that I live in, and that's broadly the types of conversations that people like me would like to have with people like yourselves in your respective organizations. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a context setting. In case you hear these types of things from your CIO, you know where they're coming from.
Imagine some of going away. So how does the CFO ensure that the pipeline of investments for technology for the company, and the company has to go on, how does that continue, and how does he choose between the various options he has?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. One of the reasons why the legacy investments are going away is because most of the legacy systems were architected to operate in different environments, right, than what exists today. Today it's very modular. Today it's very service-oriented. Today it's cloud-based, right? And all the legacy systems that we traditionally invested in, like the traditional ERP and CRM and supply chain solutions, really were designed to work 10, 15 years ago for the computing environment that existed at that time. Today, there is no patience for that, because the time to market has to be really quick, and therefore you have to kind of take the call. Do I continue to invest in my legacy platform, which is not scalable, which is not really aligned to the needs of my consumers today, or do I put in new things which are modular, which are faster, and which give me that opportunity to monetize in a much better way? That's the trade-off that you will have to do. There is no way you can just pull out everything that you've invested in and completely shift to the new paradigm, but it's something that you'll have to have that conversation on what actually works best for your environment. I'm not necessarily advocating that you have to go completely to the right-hand side, but somewhere if you don't make that switch, you're going to be left behind.
One is responding to what the future might be, right? But I think there's a slightly bigger responsibility that the CIO and the CFO could do together, which is what is the future you want to create. Otherwise, it remains a transaction between someone who's a seeker and someone who's a solver, depending on the hat you wear on that particular day. So sometimes the CIO might be the solver and the CFO might be the seeker, and on another occasion it might be the other way around. But I think whenever you have a strategic planning cycle and you imagine, reimagining is an interesting phrase, the next 10 years, the next 15 years, the next millennium even, what is it that you'd like to create? And therefore, what might be the things to do today, invest behind, so that, because there'll always be, like you said, there's always the challenge of legacy. You can't throw it all away. A large part of our lives is playing catch up. But why should that be the only life we lead? I think that's a fundamental question. And if the two entities could come together and have a serious position-independent discussion around what is it that we want to create for the future, and what is it that we'd like to imagine. I don't even know if internet will exist in the next 20 years, or what it'll be replaced with. But if I try and look at, I've seen some work in Mizoram, which actually which could destroy the internet. But it solves for a tremendous, or when I say destroy the internet, destroy our current notions of what internet does. Sorry, just to rephrase. But I think that is an interesting cloak to wear from time to time.
Yeah. And I think the real interesting thing also is,
just out of curiosity, what is that which will destroy?
So how could someone use a combination of thought, intuition, and sensorials to communicate?
Okay.
Can internet sense? Or is communication only about typing a code or a command? Can we have an internet that is built on sensorials and therefore built on sensing intuition?
But
and
that's exactly
unarticulated.
what is happening right now, and many of the researchers, they are moving towards that.
So, the amazing thing is, the solution is amongst people. There's a farmer in Mizoram who's illiterate. His son works in a brick kiln somewhere, and how the two communicate. He doesn't want to spend even 1 rupee on an SMS, but he wants to let his son know, who works in Andhra Pradesh, that the mother is ill and send some money. And what is a solution there? So I think it's this VUCA world of uncertainty is something that we need to embrace. And if the CIO and the CFO could work together towards creating a part of that world, I think that will be a tremendous legacy to leave behind.
One of the things that happened at Cisco last year, we had an internal company meeting where our CEO was speaking. And so there was a Q&A at the end of his presentation, and somebody asked him, 2 years from now, who would be the top 5 competitors for Cisco, right? And he went through the usual names, right? He said HP and all of that. He got to 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he said the 5th competitor is a company that doesn't exist today, right? And Cisco is a $50 billion company. And our CEO says one of our competitors 2 years from today will be a company that doesn't exist today. If you think about it, 7 years ago, Facebook didn't even exist. right? It's that quickly that market has changed.
Video on the internet, if you Google it, find something called Do You Know? It's an old enough video, which actually chronicles some of these things, that the top 10 businesses we have today didn't exist 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And the top X contribution to global GDP came from very different sources as recent. So, in fact, what I found interesting in that video is some student put it together. That's the most amazing thing, right? And the most amazing thing about that video is that it actually uses data that we are comfortable with, but it shows us a reality that we are uncomfortable with, right?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. And if that is the rate at which things are changing, then unless and until we decide to take control and say this is what we'd like it to be, we'll be playing even more catch up.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No problem. And the cost of the service is going down dramatically, right? I mean, look at the cost of bandwidth, for example. And I'll give you another example, the cost of storage. Storage is the most expensive thing in the world, right? Hard disks and so on. And what started out as megabytes then became, gigabytes and terabytes and et cetera, and it goes to something called an exabyte, right? And 1 exabyte in another 5 years will cost $100, okay? And what is an exabyte? If you had given Christopher Columbus a high-definition video camera in 1492, when he set sail to discover the US, right? And he started filming with a high-definition video camera, and he continued to film after that for the next, 622 years. That will be about 0.75 exabytes of storage. That will be $100 5 years from now. So you'd better have your services more competitive. Yeah.
Which is about development of the fastest computer. So you have China leads the, there is no surprise there. 737 trillion calculations per second. And in India it is 70. So you know that, where the world is going.
I didn't share that with you. Sorry, the reason why people are attending Michael Puert's classes in Harvard is because Michael Puert starts by saying that everything we are solving for is being solved. Can we just reimagine the context?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why people say. So if there was a Pushkar Viman that carried Rama from Lanka to Ayodhya in a nanosecond, if someone could imagine that at that time, Tulsidas could imagine it, then there might be some reality available somewhere for that imagination to be flowering. So that's the reason why people attend Michael Puert's sessions. So, sorry, I just got triggered with the China question. And I think that's another lens that we need to have.
The futurists around the world say that by the year 2050, 90% of what mankind will know in 2050 would have been invented between now and 2050. 90% of what you will know in 2050 is yet to be invented. Scary, huh?
Okay, we did a small survey with the CFO, so I'll also mention about technology. So so some of those issues we'll also try and raise. I'm going to take a seat.
Oh, sure.
Am I audible? Okay, so we did a small survey with CFOs, asked them about what are some of those key factors for them. And here's something that we came up with, and oops, have I got it wrong? I'll just mention, and because I prepared that earlier in the day, said that most companies or most CFOs that we spoke to for that survey, they said that they're very happy to, or they would, when they're going about buying, or when they're considering buying any equipment, any technology equipment, or investment in technology, one of the big consideration for them is the cash that they have to shell out. So if that number is high, or in their context, if it's high, they prefer to lease and finance it. So that was the stark number that came out, that conservation of capital, or how much do they have. And the second point that was whether it can be an operating expense as opposed to a capital expense. So that was a second worry, if I may say, or a second issue that the CFO's mind it played on. So that was one. So I'll probably ask Joydeep to you, for the CFO, what, we've heard a whole array of options today, and to juggle with that, it's itself a challenge. What is that important thing that if the CFO can come out with for the organization again?
Okay, I think, you guys have all heard about GE Healthcare and the innovation that has happened over the last few years. And I was very much part of it and privy to that. But a couple of things, and if you really look back, what is innovation all about? Innovation is all about business, and it's about creating or sustaining markets. That's all about it. If you really move away from the CIO's world, which is more of an information technology within the organization, it's how do you create markets, how do you sustain markets? And you create and sustain markets basically by two things. Number one, either you create reach, you create market reach, or you make it more affordable, okay? And the joint probability of both of these actually creates market. And I'll take a couple of examples, and Bhavani referred to Mac 400. It's an interesting example, and see, the first thing is, how is Mac 400? It's actually not Mac 400, it's Mac 400 versus Mac I, which was the model which was developed. And the question was, how do you create a product, okay, for healthcare which is affordable, okay? A Mac 400 costs, and Ravi is here, Ravi was very much part of this while I was there. Mac 400 costs about $1,000, and we were challenged to bring out with a product which was about $500. Okay, so the first thing that we did is, and we went to the survey, and we saw is, when you get a heartache, when you get perspiration, when you get sweat, the first thing that you go to is not a cardiologist. The first thing that you go to is basically your general physician, your doctor, your family doctor. And the family doctor actually refers you to a cardiologist. But in most examples, and if you see 90% of the cases, these family doctors or general physicians do not have a ECG machine. And many of these cases would not also be MBBSs. Take rural areas, okay? So you go to him and you check up your heart and you say that I'm perspiring. All that he would say is, go to this cardiologist or send him to a more qualified doctor. So the first thing that we asked is, how can we create a device where we can enable him to test whether the heart is normal or not? So if you go to a Mac-I, it really doesn't have reels and reels of paper which churns out ECGs. It just has, is the heart normal or not? Because I don't know whether, interestingly, that many of the MBBSs don't know how to read an ECG graph, because that is taught in an MD class. Okay, so MBBSs actually do not know. So therefore, you have to enable that MBBS doctor to see that whether the heart is normal or not. So you really have so we were selling actually products to the whole set of cardiologists and missing a whole bunch of physicians where we didn't sell. So we had to create a product which was affordable and which could be used. So that was one example. I'm right now in a company, I am right now with Tyco, and Tyco deals with, wireless and wireless connectivity, very different from the space that I worked before in healthcare. And I'll tell you one great example that we are doing and we have done. If you go to the Bombay airport, or if you go to Delhi airport, these airports, when you switch on your cells, they actually the wireless out there actually is the Bombay airport or the Delhi airport wireless. Okay, so what we are doing right now is providing technology or wireless machines which provides that spectrum, not the spectrum exactly, but the telewaves, which serves within that complex. So you are able to access. Just take, for example, India has got about 300 or 400 top railway stations. And how many people go in and go out every day? And today you have 80% tele-density, right? Now, you have all around this railway station towers which actually beam various, waves. And we are actually catching the waves because, the service providers actually buy from the towers, okay, the active space. Now, railway station, we are actually working with railways now to provide, instead of tower, basically waves which they can share with us, and we will basically work with them where they will provide the waves rather than the Airtel or a Vodafone or someone. So it's completely disruptive in the way that we think that a Airtel or a Vodafone or someone else will provide. Why? First of all, why do you need that? First of all, today many people don't know the radiation levels are much higher than the norm. Second is security. It took about 6 hours to 8 hours to shut off signals when the Kasab incident happened in VT. This is just a switch on, switch off. So basically, government of India is saying is that I need security. How can I control waves? And
Connectivity.
yeah, exactly. So therefore, so it's not happening alone in healthcare. It's happening everywhere. If you see telecom, which is a completely different spectrum, to healthcare, which is completely different. I think innovation is happening everywhere. We are not aware about it. Okay. Just another very very great example, and I've had the good fortune of working with these guys. This is a company called Embrace. Okay, it was started by a lady called Jane Chen, who is actually a group of Stanford University engineers. And Stanford University has got a center which actually does a lot of work on disruptive and affordable, business practices. So actually, these guys went all over the world and tried to find out what is the reason for infantile deaths. Okay, so as soon as the baby is born, many of the places the babies die, and they found out that it is not. One of the reasons is there's no incubation, particularly in premature babies. So what they did is they went back to the drawing boards and created just a wrapper. It's nothing, it's just a plastic which has got wax in it. Okay? So all you do is you put that waxed wrapper inside hot water, boiling hot water, and that will remain warm for the next 6 hours, and you wrap the baby. It costs now today about 10,000 rupees. Okay, and they are trying to market it. They are trying to work out with a lot of companies, GE, etc. But this is a solution which is disruptive, where it can change the way we think in terms of markets, and can be sold everywhere. We actually went to the health minister at that point of time, it was Ghulam Nabi Azad, and he said, it didn't happen, of course, and he said, you give me, we will sell. But the fact of the matter is, there are things which are happening everywhere. And this is how markets are changing.
I've just got my presentation back.
Oh.
If I can just mention quickly.
Did I help you in any way? That's
No,
innovation.
the survey indicated for CFOs, this is what the survey said. The first one is core technology, where they are saying that they're going to be spending on data center and network infrastructure. That's at the top. Second is IT services spending. Third, and interesting, I thought this one, is cloud-based services and services which are subscription-driven and end-user devices. You mentioned about all the BYODs and BYOTs. So that is the top spend. I don't know how many of you CFOs here have the same priorities. Can I have a sense from anybody who is thinking along similar lines for CFOs here?
I can comment on cloud.
Sure.
Both in terms of cloud as using our own
So if you can put
infrastructure.
on the mic, everyone will be able to hear.
Yeah, both in terms of using cloud for our infrastructure, right? And as well as, in terms of end user. So we are in, I work for Harman International, so mainly providing infotainment devices in cars. So we are also looking at trends where connectivity in cars is going to be the most important in the future. So we're looking at cars with 4G connectivity, and today you reach out to devices in your car, you need to answer mobile phones. So we are looking at technologies which you just don't use your hands. You do everything through voice recognition and stuff like that. So we are working a lot on cloud from that perspective, apart from also infrastructure, converting all those challenges that you said with the employees below 30 years wanting to have their own devices, desktop virtualization and even server virtualization, stuff like that. So yeah, we can see a huge trend there.
Okay. The CFO, the priorities that I was talking about, I mentioned two of them: conservation of capital at the top, right at the top. Second, the use of OPEX as opposed to CAPEX. And the third point, and this was something I'd request you, Gopal, to answer, or maybe highlight, the upgrade flexibility is very much on top of their mind. It's not a very easy option that is available for the CFO, because ultimately he's doing the numbers.
When you say upgrade flexibility, are you talking about upgrading what they already have?
Yeah.
Okay.
From a personal experience, I can tell you, I'm not very happy with my laptop, the Windows that it has. So a friend suggested, why don't you go to Windows 2007? So in my case, it was going to be a downgrade in flexibility. I wish I had it.
Yeah, and I think what is actually happening with upgrade flexibility, that is why, bring your own device is becoming more relevant, because the IT department doesn't want to deal with the device anymore, right? Essentially, we want to transfer responsibility for the device to the user. And then the question comes is, how do you do security? What we've chosen to do is we manage security policies at the infrastructure or the network level. And as long as we do that and protect the periphery of the enterprise, you can use any device that you want. And we also have solutions which actually recognize something called a trusted device, right? Earlier, it used to be the trusted user, where you come in and you have a user ID and a password, and I trust that you are legitimate, right? Today, we've supplemented that with a trusted device. So when you connect to the network with, let's say, your Samsung Galaxy Note, it automatically registers that Bhavani has logged in with a Samsung Galaxy Note which has this operating system. And the next time that Bhavani logs into my network with another device, he has to authenticate himself again. And the minute he uses his trusted device, we have policies embedded at the network level which control his movement within the company. So he can only access what he's allowed to access, and that's how you do it. You can never win the battle by managing the device.
But do you have a dynamic IP kind of a thing?
Yeah, we do. We do.
You also have a dynamic.
We do that as well. Yeah.
So it tracks anyway.
Correct. And then if you lose the device,
So you track
we can
it down.
remote wipe it. So,
Yeah.
so even if somebody steals it, it won't work.
It's critical. Yes, sir.
I had one question for you, sir. With all the changes that you presented in technology, my experience in one of my past companies was that we had invested in a lot of proprietary storage, and we were stuck to this particular vendor. With these trends, do you see some of that going away and some kind of standardization coming in, especially in the data center technology in that space?
Yeah, actually it's not standardization. It's actually going to more of an open source type of a thing, where it's no longer just one company's technology, and that proprietary technology has to work with products from other companies. So people don't want to get tied to one company. So across the stack, you see a whole bunch of ecosystem, right? So, you know, as they say, competition makes for strange bedfellows. Today, my best partner is company X. Tomorrow, my worst competition is company X, because we are competing in one area and we are partners in another area. And so it's a little bit of that we have today.
Apple and Samsung.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned it, about 10% of Samsung's revenue comes from Apple. So
Right.
imagine. The last slide of the point I was trying to make is about the leasing and what are CFOs thinking about leasing. Some of the factors that come right at the top for them, what motivates them to lease, and the ability to lease new technologies, that is at the top of the CFO's mind. The second, they hope, and this is what drives them, this is what motivates them to lease, is the ability, or rather the improvement that it brings about in operational efficiency. So the point that you mentioned, whether I can seamlessly switch to somebody else or not. The ability also to finance total solutions is not as important, but among the top three. Flexible in terms of conditions, and finally, of course, this is something you must be hearing, reducing cost. You must be hearing every day, I guess. You mentioned about flat IT budgets and even reducing IT budgets.
More than that, for every service that you consume, what is top of mind for CFOs is the total cost of ownership has to go down year on year. That's what it is at the end of the day, which is why the world is shifting from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, because you want flexible consumption models and you want the ability to stop something when you want to, and you don't want to be handcuffed.
No, and I think everything is moving to a solution based.
Correct.
It's no more equipment. I mean, how much do you make out of equipment? It's all solution, and everyone wants a configured solution approach. That's all.
Yeah.
So I just had a question on cloud. There's been a lot of talk about cloud being the new technology, and I think there's sufficient adoption of that. But isn't that in in terms of the amount of investments that companies have made in their own data centers, and companies which supply those, like the likes of the OEMs of HPs and Dells. So when is the inflection point? I mean, have we already reached the inflection point where companies like IBM and HP says that we need to adopt cloud, and I know they're talking about it, but at the same time, that's going to start eating away some of the sales that they may potentially do to companies which host their own data centers, right? So have we reached that inflection point, or is that still a lot of talk, apart from the whole security angle that is there in the cloud, but where is that in the whole journey?
If I may just rephrase or maybe add to what he mentioned. 2-3 years ago, it was data centers. Today, it's cloud. 3 years later, God knows if it will be a new term. So the question still is an open one for the CFOs here and outside in the industry.
More important that will go away is what he said, Gopal said, is TCO has to come down.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, it doesn't
matter. Yeah.
exactly. It doesn't matter whether it's ownership of the equipment or the cloud or whatever.
Correct. I mean, honestly, every organization only wanted a private cloud at the beginning. Everything has to be within my firewall. I can't put anything outside. It's confidential, proprietary, etc., etc. And to create a private cloud, you have to leverage your own data centers extensively. So you're not necessarily benefiting from cloud technologies if you continue to invest in your own data centers all the time. You've got to transform your data center and reduce your footprint. That's when people started buying services from public clouds. And public clouds like Google and Salesforce.com and so on, those are also out there. But then would you put your pricing and customer information in a public cloud and be completely easy, take it easy at night and sleep well? I don't know. It really comes down to your risk threshold. And then this hybrid model started developing. So people have said some things will go public, something will go private, and we'll have a combination of the two. And that's exactly where we are today. I don't think it's going either way. Most companies by default are going towards hybrid because it's also a fashionable thing to say, right?
Besides that, I think the other side also, the Googles of the world are also trying to create security atmospheres which actually secure them. So I think it's happening both in collapsible manner, while a lot of hybrid, at the same time they are trying to make it more secure.
Yeah.
So I think
what companies are also doing is infrastructure companies are continuing to innovate in data center so that it becomes more flexible.
Absolutely.
Right? It's a flexible, programmable, dynamic infrastructure which can be adjusted on the fly depending on what service you want to deploy.
I think the other big thing which is happening is convergence of technology. Everything is converging. So while you today you can control the refrigerator in the home from your telephone, have ECG transmitted, everything is converging. So I think besides the fact that you are having security as an issue and how do you go, the other thing is how do you have everything in your one device is another.
It's interesting, just a thought. Last week, the European Parliament did something very fascinating. They had an open forum on world business and ethics. I forget the name, the exact name, but it was to do with how businesses will be run in the future. And the most fascinating thing about that entire thing was not just to moderate, but to have serious inquiry around how business will be run. They invited about 150 20-somethings into the European Parliament who were doing amazing things around the world, particularly in the area of technology. So a lot of these people were running startups, were challengers, your complete anti-establishment people. And the European Parliament, there's a gentleman called Nurj Deva, who's of Asian origin, and he's very fascinating in the way he thinks and he moderate. And 2 or 3 things that really came out of that was, one was clearly what is security of tomorrow? And how do these people, the people who are, they say, the world will be built on collaboration. And how do collaboration and competition coexist? Precisely to your point, it makes strange bedfellows. That's an interesting debate that happened, and some of it is available on the internet. The second question that they came up with was that if that is the future, then what does geography mean? Right? What does IP mean? What does geography mean? What does technology mean? And some fascinating new questions have been asked. And there's one of these companies I'm on the advisory board of. They are getting people together to unleash human creativity. Now, those are the kind of, and they said there's no solution today that unleashes human creativity, and therefore it needs to be created. And if we do that, then everything around engineering will change dramatically. So there's some very fascinating discussions happening in the space out there.
I think we don't realize so much, but many of us are unconsciously doing it, is while we talk about IT, etc. In our own way, in our product, etc., a lot of revenue sharing is happening. Okay, this was not there about even 5 years back. So business models, as as you mentioned, is changing. So what we used to have a normal P&L is becoming an annuity.
Right.
So, and how do you build on annuities is also a question. So the way that we think as CFOs that this is our funnel and this will give us our income is not going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years. So the business models are also changing, and we ourselves are doing it. So I think that's another aspect.
Think of your salespeople, right?
Yeah.
When you go to annuity type of a revenue, whether you're selling software or license or something,
Downloads.
do you recognize the revenue at the point of sale, or do you recognize it every month, or
Revenue
going?
recognition norms.
Is a huge problem.
That was
And particularly in software.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the revenue recognition standard, so so there is this whole effort going on between the US GAAP and IFRS to converge. And one point where they have stuck on for about a year is on a new revenue recognition standard, which I believe is almost out now. And one of the most complex elements of that is it's what we call as the VSOE, which is vendor specific objective evidence, which is, it's just getting much and more and more complex as new business models evolve.
Yeah.
Lives a little bit complex, if I may say. Let me put this or bring this to an end. Thank you so much, everyone. I have a request to make to everyone here. If you can fill up the feedback form, it'll really help us get better. Oh, of course, I forgot. Surag has a few words to also say. If he can just take a few minutes of your time.
I know that we have way behind schedule. So what I would just try to talk in this particular session is how you as CFOs can protect your investment in IT and also make the most out of the innovations that's happening in technology. Because this is one area where there is a lot of changes that are happening, and every time you make an investment, by the time it is 2 years into the investment, it's already obsolete. And you have a better technology available, but since you've already put in your monies, you wouldn't want to look at a fresh investment. So firstly, I'll just give a brief introduction on Cisco Capital. As the name stands, it's a subsidiary of Cisco, and this was formed in 1996. And it's essentially a captive finance company, and mostly providing financing solutions for Cisco and related infrastructure financing. Current asset size is about 9 billion. Okay, this is one survey which Forrest, I just thought I should share it. This is while Ashutosh was talking about something which was done in India, what I am showing is a survey which was conducted across Australia, China, and India. And if you look at it, overwhelmingly, most of the CFOs would like to have a financing solution attached to any IT investment. So this is something which is kind of, across these three geographies, this is the kind of signals that are coming out as far as IT investments is concerned. So basically, this could be because of many CFOs wanting to convert their investments into OpEx. So I'll probably just highlight on that particular aspect where you would be able to convert your IT investments into OpEx. While we offer finance leases, we offer a sale and lease back, we offer multi-year services, what I would want to talk about is essentially the operating leases. So what happens in an operating lease that we provide is that, as I was telling earlier, technology gets obsolete and new technology keeps coming in. So as Cisco and being a part of Cisco, we understand the roadmap of each technology. So when you make an investment in a Cisco equipment, we know exactly when the next generation of technology is going to come. So what we typically do is that we provide a financing structure probably for that particular term when there is going to be a substantial change in the technology. And whatever is going to be I would call it an obsolescence risk that you would have in that particular technology, we attach a value to it and we provide it on day one. That in finance terms is called a residual value. So what we do essentially is that we are able to protect your investment in technology and also take away that obsolescence risk which is there towards the end of the useful life of the asset. That's taken away and probably enable you to migrate to the newer technology maybe 1 year or 2 years faster. So that is something which is achieved through the operating lease that is provided by Cisco Capital. And this is not a solution which you would probably get from the banks. This is only provided by companies like ours. There are other companies, but then as far as Cisco equipment is concerned, we're able to provide the most effective solution because we understand the technology, and we're able to provide better residual values for the asset because our expertise in that particular technology.
Something else.
Yeah, we do primarily for Cisco, but then any infrastructure attached to Cisco, which means in a data center you would have Cisco equipment, and then there are some other.
If it's not Cisco? If it's not a Cisco technology, would you
If it is not competition, it's fine.
Oh, if it's competition, you wouldn't do
Yeah, we would have challenges
That's
if
what
it
I
is
wanted.
competition.
It's a very wide statement.
We are
No,
selfish.
because
to that.
that's
Part of it.
It's not just switches, because we have servers.
no,
I mean,
because for Juniper, would you do it for Juniper?
no, we would not.
That's
I wouldn't want to use Cisco money to finance competition.
It's a wide statement, so.
yeah. But a lot of other companies do it for competition also.
Well, they have tried to do it, but then today they have come back to the basics. They stick to doing their own technologies. Because at the end of the day, all these companies are not finance companies, these are IT companies. They're essentially IT companies. The essential objective of setting up a captive finance company is to finance their products. So people have tried.
Sorry, how about the upgradation of technology? I think someone referred about it. You are protecting the residual value, which is slightly different from, giving assurance on the technology upgradation. Are you also, embark on that, or no?
No, see, I'm not just protecting the residual value. And don't look at it from that perspective alone. What I'm trying to do with an operating lease structure, when I provide a residual value, is that I have a visibility into the Cisco roadmap as to how many years would it take for us to come with a technology which would substantially change things. So we have the perspective on that. Based on that, we structure it, and you're upgrading. What happens when you do it on multiple generations is that you automatically get the upgrade of equipment. Suppose I structure 3-year leases for you. After say about 6 years, you would have changed you would actually migrated to newer technology and upgraded yourself without having invested, without having capex into the technology. So because what happens when we capex is that there is a tendency to use the asset to the fullest. And what we do is that we live with the old technology. In spite of the pressures from the CIO, we try to live with the old technology because we still feel that we have not utilized the asset to the fullest. And that's exactly what I'm trying to take away with the operating leases. So, of course, these are the benefits of technology financing. I'll just highlight, I've already spoken about the protection from technology obsolescence. Of course, it preserves cash because we would be able to provide you
with cash.
Funds, alternative source of funds. Your existing credit lines are not utilized. This is a new credit line which comes in. Funds come at a very competitive rate. That's something which comes in. See, this is one. This is one thing which I want to touch upon is the accelerated depreciation benefits. This is something which many companies have used, but this is not in the case of an operating lease. Now, typically what happens is you depreciate an asset over a period of 5 years. Now, what happens, certain companies you want to have to get the tax benefits much faster, what you do is that you restructure a finance lease for say 3 years. So what happens, the whole asset is capitalized in 3-year term through rentals. And you can claim the depreciation much faster. So we don't give you a depreciation, but actually depreciation, the tax benefit comes to you through the rentals, faster rentals and faster closure. That's only in the case of finance lease, not probably applicable in the case of an operating lease. This last point, and this is one big challenge that many companies are going through today, because the laws regarding disposal of assets is something which is getting stricter by the day. And it becomes an obligation of every company to ensure that the assets are disposed of safely. So this is one thing which an operating lease takes away, because in the case of an operating lease, the owner of the asset is Cisco Capital. It is not you. So at the end of the lease, when you return the asset back to us, it is our responsibility to ensure that the assets are safely disposed. So it takes away that headache completely. Because I know of many IT companies in Bangalore who have who just don't know what to do with those old assets, and they've kept these assets in a particular space. They've created space for it and just kept the assets aside because they didn't want, they can't give it to anyone else because they're not able to dispose it safely. So this is one challenge which we take away. So net what I'm trying to tell is that you are able to convert a capex completely into an opex without having the worries of asset disposal, and to make the most of the technology that is available in the market. The newest technology that is available in the market, you're able to make the most of it. And if you look at it from multiple generations, you actually end up saving a lot of money. Because I have seen customers who have done that very effectively. Many of our customers have done that very effectively, and once they get into the lease model, they continue doing that every generation of asset change. That's all from my end. Thanks. Enjoy the dinner.
Yeah, but before the dinner, just a request to fill up.